Great, thanks very much, Cheyenne. I'll try to be quick. We can smell lunch back there. It smells like roast beef and ham, but I'm not sure about that.
And maybe chicken.
And maybe chicken, yeah, no doubt. So I'm going to do the unusual thing, and that's give you my take-home messages at the start, just in case I kind of run out of time. And so I think some of this is pretty obvious. If you see these, you can read them, and they sound familiar. You can sort of check out for the talk. But AMR is definitely a global problem, requires One Health solutions. AMU and AMR are surveillance and monitoring are essential. I'm going to hit on that one a few times. Globally, a few European countries really lead the way. Some of us follow, sort of. Some of us don't follow them, but that's kind of where the action is, really, I think. International organizations, there's several active in AMR. They really do important work that we should sort of make use of. Stewardship, there's different approaches. I'll touch on this a bit. Top-down approaches, I call them, sort of regulation, big company directives. We have results from those. They demonstrate benefits. There's reasons why we should have bottom-up approaches, grassroots initiatives. The evidence is lacking. It doesn't mean they don't work. It's just that we don't have a body of literature really to substantiate their benefits. And overall, the aspects of group treatment, therapy to entire flocks, as is typical in poultry, is a problematic issue for antimicrobial stewardship that keeps coming back. It affects other species as well, but especially poultry. So at the start, need to acknowledge that antibiotics, antimicrobials are really very important tools for veterinarians and for physicians to treat bacterial disease. We can't forget about that. It's because they're so precious that we need to try to preserve them. Another thing we have to remember is a lot of the problems in human medicine with respect to antibiotic resistance are because of phenomena in the human sector. That is antibiotic use and misuse. It has to do with the way infection control does or does not work in hospitals, extended care situations. I think it's a function of the fact that we try to preserve life for so long in people, that we have so many people with intercurrent illnesses, that antibiotic resistance really takes hold. So this picture on the left, you can't read, it's from the Guardian newspaper last Friday, talking about the global problem with carbapenemase resistant or producing organisms, especially gram-negative bacteria. That's become a really big problem in public health. And the figure on the right shows, it's kind of a bar diagram showing the rate of carbapenem use in humans in different parts of the world. So you can't read what's underneath it, but some countries are using lots of carbapenem, some are using very little, and so we have differential rates of resistance emergence and spread. And this is related to use in people, so it's not an animal thing. But we can't, obviously, antibiotic use in animals does play a role. We don't really know how big a role and what the numbers really are. There's lots of debate about that. But it's becoming more clear that we have an ecological system for antibiotic resistance that involves people, infections in people, and drug use in people, animals, and plants even, and other sectors. And the antibiotic resistance determinants and bacteria really move around with more or less degrees of freedom within this greater ecological system. And so we need to have an ecological approach to controlling it that really embraces the One Health concepts of people, animals, and the environment. So we still obviously have some contribution from agriculture. There's a famous figure based on CPAR's data that you're probably all familiar with, showing trends in resistance to third-generation cephalosporin among Salmonella heidelberg in people and in poultry products and poultry. And the message here is that with the more or less use of ceftiofur in hatcheries, we had more or less resistance in Salmonella heidelberg. And so this was some really groundbreaking work that CPAR has provided for us, not just in Canada but globally. This revelation had impact around the globe. Other countries made similar investigations and had similar findings. And so it really shows the value of surveillance. In this case, antimicrobial resistance surveillance We had some use information from Martine and others, but it was pretty sketchy. And so we really need to ramp up the amount of antimicrobial use monitoring so better help us interpret these kinds of data. So why do we need surveillance? I'm going to plug surveillance pretty heavily today for both resistance and for use monitoring. And that is to identify trends in both over time, how much is being used where, so we can provide information for stakeholders to use in their own decision making around what antibiotics they're using for what purposes. Maybe some efficiencies can be produced. We need it for, this is essential tools for stewardship, antibiotic stewardship, which we will spend the afternoon talking about. It sometimes provides an evidence base for policy making and for evaluation of the effect of policies and interventions, whether they're doing good, whether they're doing harm, needs to be evaluated in both in human and veterinary sectors and so on. And we also need, I'm going to make another pitch, at some point we need to have better surveillance of veterinary pathogens, not just commensals and human pathogens. We really need to be following those veterinary specific pathogens for resistance patterns so that we can better safeguard the drugs that we have because we're not going to be getting that many new ones in veterinary medicine. All right, so here's the example of some use monitoring data. Many of you will have seen this or versions of it before. This demonstrates patterns of use nationally in the Netherlands over the last several years. The individual drug classes don't matter for this discussion. We'll look at sort of overall trends. And if you look, starting on the left in 1999, there was a gradual increase until about 2007, and then there was a fairly precipitous drop after that in total quantities of use of antibiotics in the veterinary sector in the Netherlands. And so, does anybody know why there was such an increase from 1999 through to about 2007? Any quick guesses? I've got a clue on the slide here. Okay, so what's not shown in this figure is the quantities of antibiotics used for growth promotion. And so if I added in those, this is veterinary use only, they make that distinction in Europe. If I added in the growth promotion part of it, we would see no decrease at all when growth promoters were phased out in the Netherlands. And so this is an important lesson, I think, that we can learn here in Canada and the United States as we phase out antibiotic growth promoters. What is the effect going to be on overall use of antibiotics and specific classes of use? The experience from the Netherlands, also from Denmark to some extent, and Sweden suggests that there's a compensatory increase in therapeutic antibiotics for after growth promoters are phased out. And that's something that needs to be borne in mind and watched from a stewardship standpoint. Okay, that drop in use at the end, at the latter part, of course, was related to the Dutch program for meeting reduction targets that were imposed by the government. And there's a very excellent set of presentations from Jaap Wagener and others that talk about their process, how they got there, made those reductions, and really minimized the unintended consequences of that decline. Okay, so in part they did that by benchmarking antibiotic use on farms and in veterinarians. So this is a messy slide. It shows some examples from different species, but the point of it is to allow me to say that they actually measured quantities of antibiotics were used on farms and by vets, and then set guidelines around reduction based on the spectrum of quantities used on different farms, on the principle that if your peer group can use less antibiotics and maintain health and welfare in production, why can't you? And so casting that light onto the use patterns of individuals went a long way to bringing about change and improving stewardship in the Netherlands, along with some other things. Okay, another point I wanted to make is that there are international organizations working really hard on antibiotic resistance. This is definitely a major priority for organizations like the World Health Organization and OIE. WHO has been really active on the animal and food side for at least 20 years, and they've had a number of different guideline documents on this, including a critically important antibiotic document I'll touch on in a few minutes. They've got global action plans, all these organizations for minimizing antibiotic use, and they're trying to get individual countries to do the same. Canada has a national action plan to deal with antibiotic resistance, which includes agriculture and includes a One Health approach. OIE, the organization responsible for animal health, has been very active. One of the important things that they have done is develop codes of practice around antibiotic use. A lot of stewardship would really improve if we actually adopted the guidelines in the animal health code around antibiotic use. And OIE has also taken on the task of trying to get member countries around the world to undertake antimicrobial use monitoring and helping them develop those programs. FAO is also trying to facilitate better stewardship in countries around the world, especially developing countries. In a One Health spirit, FAO, OIE, and WHO have been working together for the last decade or so to try to bring about a more coordinated approach to antibiotic stewardship and resistance, addressing the resistance problems. And then lastly, I'll just mention Codex Alimentarius, which is a really important international organization that sets food standards and has implications to trade. So far, at least as I'm aware, antibiotic resistance has not become a trade issue. There's lots of talk about whether that will happen at some point. It's been difficult to get any microbial hazards into trade-related codex documents, but it's possible down the road that might happen, and that would really up the ante in terms of motivation for improving stewardship. So the CIE list, as we call it for WHO, has been around for 12 years or so. This is, and I think it came after Health Canada's. I'm trying to remember when Martine showed that slide of Health Canada's classification system. WHO's is a little bit different. The criteria aren't exactly the same. There are a few other countries that have their own, but I think Health Canada may have done this either just before, around the same time as WHO. And it's now in its 5th iteration. It was just released, I think, last week. A new version is out. And basically, I'm going to show you a slide here, which you can't read, but basically the message is that the critically important category, and these are only medically important antibiotics. Doesn't include the category 4 in Health Canada's list, which have ionophores and those drugs not used in humans. So it has 3 categories: critically important, very important, and important. The critically important sort of group is the largest. That's one of the problems with the list, is that part gets ever increasing. It gets harder to have drugs of lower importance that may be less relevant to resistance. And within this critically important category, WHO has also prioritized them. For those who are especially important, there's additional criteria. We have criteria to classify the drugs, whether they're critically important or very important, and we have criteria to prioritize them. And so those that are yes, yes, yes across the board are the highest priority categories, and they include some of the drugs that I've mentioned today: fluoroquinolones, the third generation cephalosporins, carbapenems, that type of thing. So another sort of recent advancement, I guess, or issue at WHO is that there is now a need within the organization to have a much more rigorous process for making recommendations on any public health issue. This came about apparently because there were problems with tobacco and sugar and some other public health related issues, where there was problems with the evidence base, there were problems with conflicts of interest among experts, that kind of thing. And so now, to make a recommendation such as, what should be done about growth promoters, there needs to be a formal process that's followed. And WHO is undergoing this right now. There has to be a set of systematic reviews commission to gather the evidence base. There has to be a public announcement of who are experts on the panel, whether they have conflicts of interest or not. There has to be a consideration of unintended consequences or harms of any recommendation. There has to be consideration of what are the stakeholders involved, and what are their interests, and how might they be taken into account. So that process is going on right now. It looks like that will be finished this summer and may be published in August or September. So this will be a set of guidelines around how to use the WHO's CIE list for managing risk around antibiotic resistance. So I mentioned before that, I kind of look at stewardship programs or approaches from sort of two different types. Those that I would call the top-down approaches, that is where they're either national or regional directives. There may be laws or regulations that stipulate that thou cannot use this kind of drug in this setting. They may be industry regulations. They know that you have to acknowledge the Canadian poultry industry's really excellent move to stop using ceftiofur for prophylactic purposes. And we had in Denmark, the pork industry and the poultry industry took early initiatives around antibiotic stewardship. Those are kind of national level. They really are sort of top down in my view. We have some big corporations like McDonald's and other, and some of the integrated producers in the United States making large policies around antibiotic use and what kinds of products they will buy. And we have the examples around AMU monitoring and benchmarking that we saw in Denmark with their yellow card system and the Netherlands, which I just showed you. So these are our top-down sorts of approaches, and there's lots of data to demonstrate that they have beneficial effects on antimicrobial use reduction, on antibiotic resistance reduction. There are some harms that go with that. Some of them have been mentioned already around loss of production. There have been some issues around trading off different classes of drugs. So we stop using a lower importance class and sometimes use a higher importance class in response, which isn't good. So we can sort of monitor that. The other approaches, and I think this is more of what Canada seems to be sort of trying to get its head around doing, and the United States is a more bottom-up, grassroots types approaches. Try to get veterinarians together to decide on what is more prudent use of antibiotics and try to have a voluntary sort of adoption of good use practices. Some of these things may work. There's some evidence that some of them do, but it's much sketchier. So I think if we're going to move in this direction, we really need to increase the quality of evidence to support this kind of program, and if it's going to actually do any good in terms of stewardship. So what are some of the challenges that I see around antimicrobial stewardship that, based on a sort of global survey? Some countries have put limits on certain types of antibiotics, especially those deemed critically important for human health. Been a lot of focus globally on the third generation cephalosporins and fluoroquinolones especially. We have an example here in Canada. Some countries like the Netherlands, you can't use them unless you've demonstrated by culture and sensitivity testing that is the only drug that's available to treat that health problem in a herd or a flock. But other countries, it's wide open. We still have a few countries that use these drugs pretty widely, in some cases as growth promoters in the case of fluoroquinolones. We also have continued use of production purposes or growth promotion use of some of the critically important antibiotics. I mentioned that already. Others include colistin, which we don't use in Canada, but it's widely used in some countries, and now is really important, critically important for humans in treating those carbapenem-resistant enterobacteria. We have more countries phasing that out. Fortunately, Canada should soon be among those groups. Another sort of problematic area, which I mentioned before, is the notion of mass medication or group treatment of antimicrobials, which in the case of poultry industry is so important. It's also important and relevant in pigs and cattle in some cases. This may take the form of therapeutic use. It may take the form of prophylaxis, and some people call it metaphylaxis. The terminology can be somewhat confusing and vary depending on where you go. Especially concerning is the practice of kind of routine prophylaxis over and over. Every group gets this drug and that drug. This is where areas that are taking aggressive action to improve stewardship are focusing attention. In a lot of the European countries, this is where big savings were made in quantities of antibiotics used in cutting back on that sort of routine prophylactic use of antibiotics. What's the role of veterinary oversight? I think this is a big topic of conversation around with veterinary communities, especially in Canada now that there's going to be prescription-only availability. How can veterinarians better take this opportunity to improve stewardship? I think it remains to be seen. and there's lots of concern around off-label uses. So I'll just finish up with this slide. This is the kind of assumptions I gave to the panelists for this afternoon's discussion. It's obviously open for debates, kind of my thoughts on where we, hopefully we will end up in 5 years in terms of stewardship. So with respect to medically important antibiotics, just those ones we use in humans, I think we should plan on having no use for growth promotion and no use for routine prophylaxis without regular input by a veterinarian, supported diagnostic criteria, that kind of thing. We should have some restrictions on flock level treatment for some class of antibiotics that are, especially those that are particularly important for human health but also animal health. We should get on with starting to try to preserve the drugs we have for their animal health benefits, not just the human health concerns. And I'd like to think that in 5 years' time we'll be benchmarking antibiotic use for every veterinary practice and every farmer in Canada, as we have in some countries. I know that's really hard to do. There's lots of logistical barriers for it. But I think that the reasons for having it and the benefits to stewardship are really compelling. So with that, I think I'll complete my talk.
Thank you very much. I think we had a very productive, keynote addresses by 3 of our speakers. The delicious lunch is already here, and our keynote speakers as well as panelists are going to be around after the lunch, and we are going to have a great discussion. And please join me in thanking Dr. Hargis, Dr. Bullion, and Dr. McEwen for their excellent, thought-provoking talks.